and the world continues to suffer from the effects of China's mishandling of the CCP virus outbreak in the early stages of the pandemic. That's when they allowed the virus to escape all over the world, all the while shutting down travel within China. More than 2 years later, China's actions in handling the CCP virus continue to plague the world. With draconian lockdowns in Shanghai set to send reverberations to the global supply chain, we have CEO of American shipping and logistics company Alba Wheels Up, Sal Stile. Sal Stile, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sal, I'd like to first start by asking you, what type of changes have you personally experienced in your business over the last year or so since the supply chain crisis and inflation?
Well, I've had a myriad of changes, especially with the inability to secure sometimes capacity from the steamship lines. We've had a market where rates have been fluctuating to the highest peak in the last 30 years. I've had clients that have tremendous cash flow issues because in addition to these high rates that they're experiencing, a lot of the factories in China and other parts of the world are requesting for larger deposits before they start making goods. A lot of the factories who have also facilities and factories in Vietnam, because a lot of people wanted to leave China, also still have the same requirements. So it's really a malaise of a tremendous amount of issues going on a literally day by day, week by week basis in the supply chain.
Now, specifically in the shipping industry, what do you think is driving such high costs?
Well, what's driving such high costs is the limited capacity of chassis, the overdemand of goods for the containers, the steamship lines. Many of them now, especially with the China lockdown, are having blank sailings. But now when China comes back on and the factories reopen and so forth, you're going to see such a mass influx of goods coming in that everyone's going to be scrambling to get the container space. The rates are going to go high. And let's face it, the steamship lines made $200 billion last year collectively. They're businesses, and it's not like they're going to go to their board this year and say, oh, by the way, we made $50 million last year, but now we're only going to make $20 million this year because we're going to lower the rates. I think they have an obligation to their shareholders to get as much as they can. Unfortunately, it's at the expense of the U.S. consumer and many mid-sized and smaller-sized businesses. And putting that into perspective, out of the 11 major carriers that send goods to the United States, only one of them is American-owned, which is a quite small one. So we don't really have much to leverage politically, I would assume, especially in the U.S., to try to mitigate this problem.
So, Sal, where do you think the solution to relief lies, specifically, when it comes to the shipping industry?
Well, that's a good question. I think the solution, especially with congestion, we have to pause some of these regulatory over-the-road weight limitations. We have to really try to alleviate some of the congestion and the rules that are out in the West Coast ports. It's very hard for truckers to return empty containers. There's an appointment system that needs to be modernized a little bit better. So there's so many little issues in so many parts of the supply chain that when you collaboratively put them together, it just causes one big mess. I think automation, though, is something key that the interior ports and the West Coast, East Coast ports really have to embrace, because we're far behind our countries of our stature in trade in this area. So that's definitely an issue.
You touched upon China for a moment earlier. Now, China, specifically Shanghai right now, one of China's largest cities, 25 million people. One of the biggest ports in the world is very close to Shanghai, and it's seeing a major lockdown right now because of the virus. What type of ripple effects will these lockdowns have when a port like that is affected, do you think?
I think it's going to have tremendous ripple effects, because not only is the port shut down, the truckers are shut down, the warehouses around the area are shut down, the factories are shutting down because the factories only have so much capacity in their warehouse to make goods. So now you could see that they're probably going to be behind shipping out goods, especially for the summer. And I think this is going to have a ripple effect with goods coming in specifically into the East Coast, because a lot of companies have shifted from the West Coast because of the severe congestion. And I would say in the next 2 months, you're going to have the same problem you had in the West Coast and the East Coast with terrible, terrible delays and congestion. Added on top of all that, you have the Longshoremen and Warehouse Union, which is doing their negotiations sometime in May because their contract ends in June. So could you imagine that if they don't come to terms with the Pacific Maritime Association and they don't have a new contract to their liking, and if they went on strike, that would decimate the entire Christmas season.
Sal Stile, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
A delegation of U.S. lawmakers has just landed in Taiwan, taking the world by surprise. The visit defies threats by Beijing and comes amid growing concerns about a possible Chinese invasion of the self-governing island. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
6 U.S. lawmakers arrived in Taiwan Thursday night on a previously unannounced trip. Leading the bipartisan delegation are Senator Bob Menendez, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. They're meeting on Friday with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen and the island's defense minister.
China is looking at the Western response to the world unfolding in Ukraine, and it plans to consume its neighbor Taiwan in the same fashion.
The surprise visit comes as lawmakers are increasingly wary of a possible invasion by Beijing into the democratically ruled island, which the Chinese Communist Party claims as its own. And just last month, to assure Taipei of U.S. support, President Biden sent a delegation of former defense officials to visit the island. It was amid heightened concerns of Beijing's next steps following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A spokesperson for the Taiwanese government said the latest visit is again a demonstration of the U.S.'s rock-solid support to Taiwan. And Senator Graham tweeted after landing that he's honored to visit what he calls a beacon of freedom in a troubled region. Meanwhile, the visit is drawing a furious response from Beijing, which on Thursday threatened that it would take forceful measures to defend Chinese territorial integrity. But such claims are challenged by the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who is warning Beijing over its close ties with Russia.
China cannot expect the global community to respect its appeals to the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity in the future if it does not respect these principles now when it counts.
And after wrapping up their 2-day trip to Taiwan, the lawmakers will then head to Japan for top-level talks on China. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
And Pfizer is going to ask the FDA to approve its vaccine booster for children ages 5 to 11. The drug maker says its booster shot increases antibodies against Omicron for kids within that age group. In a small study, Pfizer gave 140 vaccinated kids a booster 6 months after their initial 2 shots. There was a 36-fold increase in antibodies against Omicron in 30 of the children. Back in February, the data collected by New York health officials showed that the Pfizer vaccine was not effective for this age group, but they still considered the shots helpful in preventing hospitalization. Neither study has been independently evaluated. Pfizer will make its request to the FDA in the coming days. New York City has been reeling from an uptick in violent crime, with the latest high-profile instance playing out in New York City subway, where at least 10 people were shot. Here to discuss the ongoing crisis, we have Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, who represents part of New York City in her district. Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Congresswoman, with regard to the shooting in the New York City subway 2 days ago, prior to the suspect being apprehended, what was the feeling like among New Yorkers knowing this madman was still on the loose?
Well, people are certainly on edge, even after the subway shooter was caught, because we have a crime problem in New York City. Unfortunately, policies put in place by those who control our city and our state government have created an environment where crime is being attracted. The criminal element is being attracted in our city. So yesterday's incident was a horrific one, and it was the most high-profile one we've seen in some time on our subways. But the reality is that crime is up 65% in our transit system, despite the fact that we still have half the ridership than we did pre-COVID. So people are being attacked, robbed, sex crimes happening on our subways. There are hate crimes that are happening, people being assaulted and shoved in front of trains, stabbed. So there is a serious criminal element here that has been created by the policies put in place by the Democrats that run City Hall and our state capitol.
Congresswoman, is there any concern that political correctness has seeped its way into the public security sphere, thereby making the public less safe?
Well, look, I think at the end of the day, you just have a bunch of left-wing Democrat politicians who have decided that they were going to make the job of the police officers more difficult. They think, wrongfully, that they know how to do the job better than the cop that's on the street. And we need to do more to listen to our police, give them the tools that they're asking for, and help them do their job. Instead, what we have are these politicians that are tying their hands, taking away their resources, and changing laws so people are not being kept behind bars. One of the things that I've done as a member of Congress has been to push for federal resources. We were successful in getting millions of dollars for protective equipment, forensic equipment, as well as the NYPD K-9 unit. And I'm proud of that, because when a lot of politicians are talking about defunding the police, I'm out there doing what I can to deliver more resources to help them do their job. But you know, we have to recognize that the laws in New York have to change if we are to restore public safety. Albany right now and our governor have refused to fix the radical bail law. And if that's the case, we need to replace them. The other issue is the idea that they want to close Rikers Island and open up a jail in the boroughs, in each borough. You know, I'm opposed to that plan. I think instead, let's invest resources that you would use to build a jail and put it in Rikers Island to modernize the facility, update the buildings, make sure that it's safe for both inmates and officers. But Rikers Island is where it should be, because people have tried to escape Rikers Island and have not gotten away because it's just that, an island. But now if you take those individuals and you put them in jails in the boroughs, if they get out, what's going to happen? They'll be running across the neighborhood. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to have a jail in their backyard. So I urge the mayor and the Democrats to abandon that plan, and let's have some common sense here.
So you raised the issue of politicians calling to defund the police. Police officers are human beings, after all. After being demoralized by certain public figures, which then has the trickle effect of creating a hostile environment from the public who's influenced by these ideas, do you think there needs to be a culture shift where there's more public support for law enforcement from these cultural figures and so-called influencers, if you will?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people who are demonizing and villainizing our police officers. And we only need to look at what occurred yesterday, where the police were there to take action, find this individual within 24 hours. And I think they would have found them sooner had they not been stripped of their resources over time, and we had the security cameras working in cooperation with the NYPD and MTA. But the reality is that we have to support our police, and there's been too much anti-police rhetoric coming from leaders in our city and state government, and those who are in federal government as well, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She has protested putting police on subways. I've been advocating for police on subways, and you know what? At the end of the day, now they're going to be adding them. But what if we had more police on subways prior to yesterday? Perhaps this horrific crime could have been stopped. So I think it's incredibly important that the community show support for the police, which they are doing. And as a matter of fact, the polling suggests that 3/4 of the people in New York State want more law enforcement, they want more cops on the street, and they fear that they say that public safety is the #1 issue for them this election cycle. And I think it's really important for politicians to hear, so they change course.
Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, thank you so much.
It's great to be with you again. Thank you.
Russia is sanctioning U.S. lawmakers. The Russian Foreign Ministry announced that they're giving 398 U.S. Congress members minor sanctions and banning them from entering Russia. The ministry's statement includes a list of U.S. members of Congress. Russia says this is in response to the Biden administration's wave of sanctions against Russia, against over 300 members of Russia's own legislative body. About 41 House members are left off the list. They include 27 Democrats and 14 Republicans. Among them are California Democrats Maxine Waters and Eric Swalwell, as well as Republicans Adam Kinzinger of Illinois and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. It's not clear at this point how Russia decided who got sanctioned and who did not, but the ministry mentions House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. They say that Pelosi was not included because she is already banned from entering Russia.